My sort of fascination with royal history goes a long way. And I think this really started, I don't know if you're the same, Thomas, but it really started at school for me. The teacher was very good and literally went through a lot of the wonderful history of our British monarchy. And it was fascinating to me exactly how they ruled, what they did, and really how they held court. The big ones, of course, like Henry VIII, you just kind of think, wow, he just rowed his own boat, didn't he? Didn't really care who he trampled on, all of that sort of thing. And then Elizabeth I, I always felt was vastly underrated because imagine, we think about this today, but imagine this being a lady monarch, a woman monarch, pushing it back against all of that skullduggery that would have gone on in the royal court. But she held tight. So clearly, the name Elizabeth is all about being strong but silent. Apparently, though, she wasn't too silent behind the scenes. It does fascinate me. What also makes me think is the fact that, when you look at royal stories, I often think that everything is just literally repeated, as it is in our lives, really. When you look back, for instance, and you look in your history and you think, what made me, for instance, take a life onto the stage, as it were, then you look at your history and realise that actually that person did music hall, or that person was a pianist, or, you know what I mean? And it's genetics, isn't it? But of course, when you are royals, things are literally, bred for you, and you have to decide the world that you're going to be. Over here, what's fascinating, I find, is the fact that we look at Harry and Meghan and their revolving door of staff. And you think, there's two independent ex-royals. Seemingly, they can't keep a grip on any staff. And everybody says that Meghan Markle's diva duchess in stilettos, all of that sort of stuff. Again, though, history does repeat itself in more ways than one. As ever, let me explain. Welcome back, one and all, and welcome to brand new subscribers. Thank you for picking our channel, and thank you for being part of our chums. We'll all give you a wave. That's right. Yes, absolutely. Now, I do find this sort of stuff interesting because particularly Edward and Mrs. Simpson in our timeline. And as I said, when I found her flat, which is in George Street, just off Edgware Road, it's hard to imagine that this was a glamorous location now, because you look at it and think, it's not that nice, but obviously in that period, the 1930s, can you imagine the scandal, the sensation? There was the king calling upon a married woman, Mrs. Simpson. Now, when they departed royal life, as you know, the king didn't really get to grips with the fact that he wasn't a king anymore. And there lied really the bigger problem, right? He couldn't grasp the fact that he'd let go of the crown. And it was difficult for Wallis Simpson, as you can imagine. Now, what I've uncovered, and there's elements of it around, is the fact that in fact they got through a lot of staff. Oh yes. And this again, just you talk about history repeating itself, all of that sort of stuff. Now, where this got interesting was the fact that it wasn't in fact Wallis, who you might have thought being the diva. You see, she really had a few staff when she was married to Mrs. Simpson, but he had got a full army of staff. Somebody to even iron the newspaper. This was the 30s, trust me. The newspaper had to be freshly ironed before it was delivered to the monarch. Can you imagine that now? Well, you're doing yours now, are you? It's incredible, isn't it, to think that this sort of stuff went on. But what happened was they couldn't keep staff, so much so that even at the time where he was trying to get staff for Wallis in London, they just couldn't cope with his demands. Remind you of anybody? Maybe Andrew, you know what I'm saying? Now, here's where this gets interesting again, because right at the 11th hour, whenever anybody was let go, fired, removed, don't stand that man in front of me, and other sort of sayings I'm talking about, well, Wallis would make sure, number one, that they had an excellent reference, normally behind the back of the former king. And not only that, in order to show an appreciation of their service, for a while at least, Wallis would make sure that they left with an engraved either teaspoon, silver spoon, with an engravement on of how long they worked there, and with grateful thanks with both the king's name and Wallis's name. Now, think about this. Where did somebody get the idea for the signed wooden spoons? Oh yes, you see, nothing is new. And what's fascinating about this is, as I said, apparently when the king found out, he was furious because he thought this stuff were useless. Why are we giving them a reference? Wallis saw the fact that, they'd had a bit of a difficult time and probably found it a little bit hard to get another job, or indeed without a reference. She made sure they had both. It only stopped when apparently she heard about the black market of the engraved teaspoons, and consequently that little piece of memorabilia suddenly was put to bed. Fascinating stuff. Anybody else agree? As ever, if you can like, share and comment respectfully. Neil Shaw, Kensington, London.